Welcome back to NPTEL, the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning. We are in the first module of our lectures. The first module, as you know, is introductory in nature. We have already been through 6 lectures, the first 2 of which were devoted to an understanding of the domain of cultural studies. The ones after 3 or 4 after those were devoted to the way in which the findings from science may be incorporated into an understanding of ourselves as cultural beings, in which the paradigm of evolution was considered as one of the best paradigms which can shed light on human behavior and psychology, which lead to culture. In the last lecture, we looked at memetics in a bid to understand cultural units in a way that is analogous to biological units called genes. And today we are moving into what is really the third phase in the first module, which is devoted to cultural theory, and the first theory that we are going to look at is the theory of structuralism. So, as always, let's do a recap of what we saw in the last lecture. In the last lecture, we saw, among other things, that according to scientists, according to cultural thinkers or cultural studies practitioners who believe in bringing in an analogy between biology and culture, the field of memetics for them is a strong field, in that it through the analogy of the gene and the meme enables us to look at both cultural transmission and genetic transmission in terms of evolution. We saw that the meme is a noun which may be defined as a unit of cultural transmission or imitation. And as examples of memes, we saw that the examples were given by Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene, where a chapter has been devoted entirely to what he calls memetics, or the study of memes. And we found that examples of memes are tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes, fashion, technology, language, and religion. And over and above that, we also saw that, as Dawkins showed us, for genes to survive, for memes to survive, they should have these qualities of longevity, fecundity, and copying fidelity. Only by these characteristics may memes survive as cultural units in the cultural, what we may call the memosphere. Then we found that Dawkins very beautifully tells us that we are not really slaves of memes. We are not slaves of these thought patterns that are there in our minds, that are even instantiated as neural patterns in our brains. What saves us as a species is our unique capacity for conscious foresight and of altruism. Okay, conscious foresight allows us to to sort of envision a future towards which we may work, and towards which we may also change our memes, and our capacity for altruism, okay, of helping others, whether in their pure form or in their reciprocal form. This too is a characteristic we have. It may save us from being what Dawkins calls in his essay slavish, slavish imitators or slaves of genes, right. So, I hope in this brief recap we have been able to quickly recall what we did in the last lecture, and today we move into this very important domain called cultural theory. Okay. Without theorizing, without a degree of abstractness, okay, we shall never be able to bring to bear upon different cultural forms, phenomena, etc., certain generalized statements. Only when we know theory, okay, when we are acquainted with and then adept at theorizing, can we throw some light on phenomena, cultural phenomena, which otherwise will remain heterogeneous, discrete and isolated. Okay. So, first we are going to briefly, very briefly look at what cultural theory is, at what theorizing is, and then move on to our first theory, which is structuralism. The key source texts in this lecture are Chris Barker's Cultural Studies, Theory and Practice, and Zeman and Capozzi's Cultural Theory and Anthology. This is an edited volume, actually edited volume, Cultural Theory and Anthology, right. So, let us begin with asking this question, which many find difficult to answer. Okay. What is theory? Theory has received, if I may say, a bad name, okay, in from certain quarters, and to be fair, at least at times their fears or criticisms may not be without any foundation. But what is all the more alarming is the tendency in some people, in academics, to completely throw theory out of the scenario. Okay. If as some theorists have shown, it perhaps arises among other things from a fear of learning new words, from a fear of learning new new terms, new technical terms. I have, as a person who likes theory, okay, who does theory, I have always been surprised at this. For instance, we do not think twice before teaching a term like photosynthesis by teaching the theorization, okay, of or the articulation in specific words, right. The articulation of how a plant produces its own food. Okay. We do not find it a grandiose idea, okay, or something, or even something that is not required to teach a class standard 4 or standard 5 student photosynthesis, right. The student is expected to know it, but why do some people dissuade even postgraduate level students from undertaking theory, right. This is also in the humanities, okay, akin to formulating. These are formulations. So, if you are not scared to formulate theories, to formulate stuff about, or formulate or write out in not jargon really, but write out in a formal sort of a way, okay, what for instance entropy is, or the second law of thermodynamics is, why can we not formulate or articulate things in an equally formal manner about cultural phenomena, okay, where we find that or when we find that formulating or articulating things in a formalized way in about as far as scientific phenomena are concerned is a given. Okay. So, well, let us look at this slide. Theory may be at this initial stage, okay, theory may be described or defined as an intellectual activity whose main job, so to speak, is these three things, okay, is to interpret, right, cultural data. By cultural I mean all cultural forms, maybe literary data, okay, a literary text, or maybe sociological text, or maybe a social situation or cultural practice, right. Theory, the job of theory is threefold, okay, which is to interpret, to make certain generalizations, okay, by the use of concepts, and our next module is therefore devoted to key concepts in cultural studies with which we build theories, okay. And finally, to offer a critique. Theory does not mean simply writing out in difficult English or in difficult terms, okay, using jargon, things that you can talk very simply about, right. So, theory is therefore a description in an intellectual activity in which you describe things about culture and other cultural forms in a certain manner. Okay. It may be also called a way of speaking, and you interpret all the cultural data in front of you. You try and make abstractions, generalizations about those, so that you have certain theories which you can apply, and you offer a critique of those cultural forms and cultural practices. So, basically this is what one does in theory, right. So, we may have other kinds of terminology in a bid to understand what theory is. So, the alternative terms and phrases that we may use for theory are these. A theory is an organized set of ideas. A theory is also an explanatory framework. Theory is a position you take on any issue. A theory is a general idea. A theory is also a comprehensive explanation of something, and a theory is also a proposition. Now, how are you expected to go about even talking about socio-cultural phenomena, right, practices and objects, if you do not have, for instance, an organized set of ideas around which you begin to talk about something, if you do not have an explanatory framework, right, a theoretical framework. For instance, if you do not have a general idea, or even for instance when you do not have a certain position to critique that. So, do not be scared of theory. Learning theory is the most beautiful exercise, and you will find that it equips you not just academically, but for so many aspects of life. So, what is theory? The alternative terms, as said, theory is, if you look at this slide again, organized set of ideas. It is an explanatory framework. It is a comprehensive explanation, a proposition, a general idea, and a position you take on socio-cultural issues and practices and objects. Fine. So, let us read from Zeman and Kaposi's Cultural Theory and Anthology, and in the introduction to this edited volume, this is what they have to say. Cultural theory constitutes a step back from an immediate engagement with culture to a place of critical reflection. This is important, I have highlighted this. To a place of critical reflection, where insights gained and lessons learned in the study of culture are consolidated into general frameworks and organizing principles for future analysis and investigation. I think this is one of the finest ways in which you can tell a student what the business of theory is all about. Let us unpack this a bit. Theory, they say, is not an immediate, unreflective engagement with the forms and practices of culture, in the sense that you like many people who are you just do not give very casual comments about a cultural object or form or cultural practice, or generally of what culture is, right. This is not being academic, this is not being reflective. So, when you are doing theory, your responses are never immediate. They are not reactions. They are, you are expected to have thought out reflections that are thought out. So, it is a step back from and says, as they say, an immediate engagement with culture to a situation or to a level, so to speak, of critical reflection. Now, the next part is also important, where insights gained and lessons learned in the study of culture are, look at this word, consolidated into general frameworks. Look at the slide before this, we saw that theory is also an explanatory framework. So, all the lessons learned, so you make observations, after observation you come to try and extract a general statement or framework, right, within which you can explain not just the cultural phenomenon that you have been studying, but which will also accommodate at least similar, similar phenomena that you will come across in the future, that others may come across in the future. So, you could even say the test of a theory is in the number of individual occurrences of phenomena that could be explained by it. So, where the lessons gained are consolidated into a general framework and organizing principles. Now, the data that you have, in that sense, it is not different from the scientific enterprise really. You have to organize that data, you are not to leave it chaotic, you have to organize those data within the general framework and principles. There are some organizing principles, and the important word here is for future analysis and investigation. As we say that it has to lend itself to an equally sound analysis for future events and similar events that you are going to observe in culture. So, cultural studies, now this is a quotation from Chris Barker in his book Cultural Studies Theory and Practice. Cultural studies is a body of theory generated by thinkers who regard the production of theoretical knowledge as a political practice. See here, in fact, so important is theory to cultural practice that Barker does not hesitate to even define cultural studies as a body of theory. So, cultural studies and theory are in that sense analogous, they are even perhaps the same. So, cultural studies cannot do without theorizing. Now this is a body of theory that has been generated by thinkers, not simply for the sake of making theoretical formulations. There is another part to it, and which is to do with, again let us go back to that slide, to do with position, right, where he says that who regard the production of theoretical knowledge as a political practice. The theorizing therefore becomes a political act. So, theorizing has, as we saw in the first two lectures, that the revealing power structures, talking about power is one of the fundamental aspects or one of the fundamental jobs, if you like, of cultural studies. So, in that sense, theorizing is not only making abstractions, theorizing is also a political act by which you show the structures of power as operating in society. Here again, continuing to read from Barker, here theory is not held to be a neutral or objective phenomenon, but a place of positionality. Remember, we came across position as a word that you can use for theory, that is of the place from which one speaks, to whom and for what purposes. Within the domain of cultural studies, there are a variety of theoretical perspectives that compete for ascendancy, the most prominent of which are Marxism, structuralism and post-structuralism. And in fact, owing to paucity of time here, because there are other modules we have to do, there are other things that we have to look at, I shall also be talking about structuralism, Marxism and post-structuralism as theoretical stances in cultural studies, right. Of course, feminism is a very important part, a very important theoretical framework, but I would be taking it up when I talk a bit about gender, or other there may be 2 lectures devoted to gender. So, even though I may not be able to talk about different theories, we talk about post-coloniality, for instance, is another theory, but these will also be spread out over the other lectures in other modules, right. Fine. So, having talked about theory, though of course very briefly, I could have given a whole lecture on theory really, but there are other issues to be looked at. We are now going straight into this theory known as structuralism, and we shall see how these are again this is a theoretical framework, this is a position, this is these gives us propositions in as theoretical enterprises. Fine. The first thing to note is structuralism is a science. By science here, I do not mean that it is a branch of it is a branch of the sciences like physics is, or biology is, or chemistry is. Okay. It is a science or a systematic, okay. It is a systematic, rational, logical study of humankind. Okay. So, even in the humanities and social sciences, okay, where even though some people say that sometimes vagueness is a certain degree of vagueness is a virtue, there are theories that at least aim to look in a systematic way at at the cultural products of humankind. Okay. So, structuralism, we may first define it as a science of humankind. And what is, let us look at this slide here. What is the goal of structuralism? The goal of structuralism is to discover or uncover basic structures. Remember our lecture, I think 4th lecture, if I am not mistaken, on evolutionary psychology. There too we had seen that the goal of evolutionary psychology, okay, is to uncover the structure and the design of the human mind. Okay. Here what happens is, it is also a systematic study, it is a bid, it has as its goal the uncovering of structures, but these are very fundamental structures which can be applied to maybe all forms of culture, even science as a form of culture, the structuralist enterprise, and we shall look at this in a while. So, suffice it for now to simply understand that structuralism seeks to uncover or to dig out, so to speak, okay, the basic structures of culture, the basic structures of our thinking. Now, it holds therefore that there are deep structures, okay, in us. The deep structures are those of actions, cultural arrangements, thoughts, perceptions and feelings. Okay. Now, without the deep structures in us, right, almost as a priori in our in our minds, without these deep structures, structuralism holds as a theory that we cannot the human race cannot generalize, okay, cannot generalize or generalize or make general statements, okay, about cultural phenomena. Everything would remain chaotic. Okay. So, going by the deep structures of perceptions, thoughts, cultural arrangements and feelings and actions, we try and do structural analysis of culture. Right. Now, the structuralist school is not one that is only to do with cultural studies as a discipline, as a domain. It is applied to many fields and more than what I am showing here. But for instance, it suffices for us to understand the scope, that it is applicable to anthropology, to literature, to psychology, to mathematics, to linguistics, maybe to the computer science, to biology, and some strong proponents may claim to in fact all knowledge forms that humankind has ever produced. So, therefore, if you go back to the various terms that or synonyms of theory, we find that structuralism is a cultural theory, in that it is an explanatory framework, it is an organized set of ideas, and it is also, it may not be an overtly political position, merely say that structuralism is an apolitical, it is a non-political stance, but it too has a particular stance, a position which we shall see. Now, the structuralist theory holds that the mind is a structuring mechanism, okay, which follows rules to make sense of the world. Now, remember, as I said, we have deep structures in our minds without which all data would have been it would have been terribly chaotic, would not have. So, how does one make sense of the stimuli that we keep getting all the time? How does one make sense of not just the basic stimuli, but also all the complex stimuli that keeps coming to us, that we take in all the time, right? So, the mind has to somehow structure to make some sense of it, has to make some, has to organize all the data that are coming in. So, the mind therefore, structuralists say is a structure, is a structuring mechanism, and that the mind follows rules, right, follows rules in order to make sense of the world. A structuralist understanding of culture is concerned therefore with the systems of relations of an underlying structure and the grammar that makes meaning possible. Now, we know that meaning, the emanation of meaning, the creation, the encoding and decoding of meaning, as we saw in the first or second lecture in module 1, is one of the fundamental goals of cultural studies, okay? At least in new or contemporary cultural studies. So, what does a structuralist approach to culture do? It is concerned with how meaning in culture is a result of a system of relations, okay, among different units. So, therefore, the inspiration really is from the study of language given to us by Ferdinand de Saussure, a Swiss linguist, and it may also be one of the limiting factors of this theory, but the fact is it draws its inspiration, the cultural variant of structuralism draws its inspiration from the linguistic theories of structuralism and semiotics as given by Ferdinand de Saussure. Okay. So, anyway, culture is seen as therefore a system of relations, relations among what, or relations between what? What are these units that we are talking about is what we shall see in a while. So, as I had mentioned, Ferdinand de Saussure, the Swiss linguist, okay, is he devised the study of science or semiology, or some call it semiotics, which is a science of science. Now, this is the most, or you would say the science is the fundamental unit not only of culture and language, but also of structuralism as a theory. Okay. Structuralism as a theory begins with the basic unit known as science. A scientific investigation, okay, into culture, into language, into all cultural forms, and tries to give some organizing principles, okay, a framework of how to manage, so to speak, and how to both encode and decode otherwise enormously chaotic, so called chaotic data. There is another name here which is C.S. Peirce, and we will not be going into Peirce, we will be staying more with Saussure, but he says this: we think only in science as human beings, therefore, science or its practices which are known as signifying practices. Okay. Science are what defines us, or science, thinking in science is, as Peirce says, something that characterizes, okay, us as thinking beings. We think only in science. So, science are what is used in meaning, and if you ask how are science related to meaning, science are used both in the creation and interpretation of meaning, and we shall, when we unpack this theory, we shall understand how. For the time being, it is just it is simply you may simply understand that the sign is the basic unit, not only in language, culture and other forms, or not only in structuralism. Even some of the thinkers say that it is a basic unit of the thinking process itself. And how is it that? Because it is through the sign, the creation of the sign by us, okay, by human beings, so much so that we are called homo significans, not just homo sapiens, but homo significans, that we are always in a system of signification. So, signs are used in both the creation and the interpretation of meaning. It seems under this theory at least that without signs there is no thinking, without signs there is no meaning. Now, going by the school of semiotics and structuralism, therefore, the first step always is to understand from a linguistic point of view that any word is a sign, okay, or word is a sign. The word itself is a sign. Okay. What is a sign? A sign is made up of two parts, okay, as you see in this slide here, which is signifier and signified. Okay. So, in another way of putting it, a sign may be split, right, into two parts. Scholars call it like the two sides of a piece of paper, the recto and verso sides, which you cannot separate. Can you separate the recto side of a piece of paper from its other side? Okay. But at the same time, you say that this paper has two sides. So, also a sign. A sign has or comprises two parts, one is the signifier and the signified. Okay. The signifier, according to Saussure, is the sound image, and by implication, by extension, we can also say that it is also the mark on the page, right. So, the sound image or the mark on the page, and the signified, that is what is, you could say, what is the psychological impression, okay, created moment you use a signifier, okay, a sign, a signifier, that is the sound image or the mark on the page, what the psychological impression that you get, that is called the signified, which for which we may also use the term concept. So, therefore, every sign has two parts, a sound image or a written image, okay, which elicits a response, which is a psychological response to us, which was what Saussure said, and which others say are also the conceptual part of the sign. Okay. And this whole business, this whole process, so to speak, okay, of having a signifier and having it sort of give us a psychological impression, which is a concept, is known as, if you look at this slide here, is known as signification. The whole process of the sign and what it does, its two parts do, is known as signification. Okay. Therefore, meaning, okay, meaning is a matter of two parts. Meaning is a matter of the sound image, which is, as you know, the signifier, and the concept, that is the signified. Okay. And the association, right, between the sound image and the concept, the association between the signifier and the signified is what gives us the meaning. Okay. For instance, now this is a very common example used. For instance, if we have a sound image, that is, I say the word tree, this is a sound image, or I write these letters TREE, okay, this is a written image. Okay, image, these are marks on this slide, right. So, when the moment I utter the word tree and I say or I write down tree, it will create what Saussure called a psychological impression, pardon my handwriting, a psychological impression in our minds, which is the concept, and then we may think of a tree. Okay, or if you may think of maybe some kind of tree structure in your in a computer science, right. Now, therefore, every sound image or every signifier, right, every signifier would therefore has to, if meaning has to happen, this is important, okay, every signifier will have to give you a psychological impression called the concept. There is no signification, okay, if a signifier has no signified. In fact, we can't even call it a signifier, because it does not signify something, then it is not a sign. Okay. It can never enter into the process of signification. Signifier and signified and sign and signifying system or signification. I would like to draw your attention to a very important formulation within structuralism, and this is the concept of arbitrariness. Okay. Now, we know we have a signifier and we have a signified. Okay. Saussure says that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is one of arbitrariness. That is, it is an arbitrary relation in the sense that there is no one-to-one correspondence, okay? No one-to-one or one-on-one correspondence between a sound image and the concept. This is immensely important, and I may be repeating this even in other lectures. Say for instance, this chair that I am sitting on, okay, just consider this. I am sitting on a chair, and this chair is an object. Okay. If a word is a sign, okay, and chair is a word, chair is also a sign. So, if chair is a sign, then chair has to be composed of two parts, the signifier and the signified. Okay. Now, the moment I say chair, right, I am not referring to this chair at the moment. The moment I say the word chair, as a person acquainted with the English language, okay, the signifier chair is going to elicit a response in you, a psychological impression or a concept of a chair, right. Because it is arbitrary, we have to learn it, right. Had there been something ontologically, okay, or essentially chairish about a chair, then anyone would know that this is the term we have to use for chair. Okay. So, likewise in the majority of words in all languages, the relationship between a word that is assigned to an object, okay, is arbitrary. Now, there are some words which we call onomatopoeic words, that is words that resemble the sound. For instance, hiss resembles the sound made by a snake. There are, now Saussure says as well, there is no denying the fact that there are words in all languages that are onomatopoeic in nature, or which resemble, or where there is a one-on-one correspondence because it resembles the sound. But he says that these are very few, right. So, it does not, so few, they are so few in number that after some time, and this association does not really matter, because it does not apply to other words. The repertoire is very small. Further, in English we may use the word hiss to indicate the sound made by a snake, but the sound made by a snake need not be hiss in other languages. So, even in onomatopoeic words there is an element of arbitrariness. Okay. So, this is one of the fundamental characteristics which also has enormous implications as we understand culture, as and we understand the relationship in signs, between signs and the signifier and signified in the cultural level as one that is arbitrary. Therefore, the second point is meaning is relational, okay, relational in a chain of relations. For instance, a sign is what it is not. This is called meaning by differentiation, or that meaning is differential. For instance, a cat is a cat not because of its ontology. Okay? A cat, the meaning of cat arises by differentiation with other similar sounding words, okay? Like hat, mat, that and rat. It is because it is in a system. This is very important. Okay? Remember, structuralism is all about systems. It is all about relations. Okay? It is all about structures. It is all about relations among different units, okay, in a particular structure. So, if you look at this as a structure, the structure of the first sentence is a structure really. Okay? So, cat, or the meaning of mat for instance, is derived from its differentiation with similar sounding words. Now, in the second sentence we find also from the point of view of not just sound, if you group them or cluster them in a different way from the point of view of dwelling places. Okay? So, from the point of view of dwelling places, there is nothing ontologically ontologically huttish about the word hut, that says that you should call a particular dwelling place hut. The assignment of the term hut to a particular level of dwelling place gets its meaning from its differentiation with all kindred words. Okay? Therefore, meaning is relational in a change. A hut is a hut because it is not a hovel, it is not a shed. right. A house is a house because it is not a shed or hovel or hut, or nor is it a palace. Do you understand? Okay. So, a sign is then what it is not, right. The meaning is therefore relational in a chain. So, therefore, see we saw that a word is equal to a sign, that is, a word is a sign. Now, we are going to say, when we come to the cultural realm, that a sign may also therefore be any cultural artifact. It may be any cultural object, it may be even a cultural phenomenon, or it may be also a cultural practice. We can have an explanatory framework for culture, or we can have we can have propositions, okay, paradigms in understanding cultural phenomena, okay, as units and rules. Look at this slide here, please. A sign therefore is, or any cultural artifact, practice, phenomenon, anything in culture is also a sign, because it signifies something, right, and it follows, it has its meaning in a system of units and rules, okay, and this is the way, one of the ways in which we can understand and therefore theorize cultural phenomena. Okay. The meaning of cultural practices, forms, events, okay, all these emanate from a system of difference. Remember relationality, okay, meaning is relation in a change. So also you just have to transpose this to the level of the cultural. So also cultural meaning happens as a matter of relation, as a matter of differentiation among with other cultural units, and working in a system of units and rules. For instance, in this we found in the linguistic level that there is a rule here. In the first case, the rule is one to do with sound, is based on sound. So, so that you cannot have cat, house, shed, that in one sentence. So, it's these units are following, or they are grouped, they are clustered as a laid out here, okay, as per a particular rule which is based on sound. And in the second instance, the rule is based on dwelling places. So, you see this is even in the realm of culture, all cultural practices can be again brought under a structure in which we try and understand those, okay, through by kind of attaching certain rules by which we may understand these. This is the way we theorize language, this is the way we theorize cultural practices. Therefore, if you look at this slide, culture is a structured system. Okay. Culture is about signifying practices. Any cultural practice will have a meaning. Okay. There is a signifier, or that is a particular cultural practice that you have which signifies something, which gives a meaning, creates a meaning or a concept in us about and therefore, it is a matter of signifying practices, and it follows it is about units and rules. It is in a system of units and rules, okay. And this is something we are coming up something we are coming to in the first place. It is also based importantly in the structuralist understanding on certain binary opposites. Now, think about binary opposites in terms of how you understand the word binary in your classes. For instance, in zeros and ones, this is the absence of something and the presence of something. For instance, nature and culture is a binary set. Then man and woman, light and darkness, okay, black and white. So, these are understood also in another kind of clustering, another kind of arranging by rules, and that rule is of one of binary opposites. This then we have to say is an anti-humanist theory. When we look at meaning as emanating from underlying structures, it is an anti-humanism. That doesn't mean that it is anti-human or that it is anti-humanitarian. By anti-humanist means, first let us talk about humanism. Humanism is a school of thought, is a philosophy, is an orientation, is a method in which the human occupies center stage, in which everything is understood in reference to the human being. Okay? The human is the center of reference. Now, structuralism removes the human being as the central point of reference and puts the structure, or you may say even the sign, as the central point of reference, right. So, if you look at this slide here, it is anti-humanist because it goes outside the individual ego, seeing the individual also as part of a system of structures, seeing his or her cultural practices as to be understood within signifying systems and as within structures and units and rules. Okay. Therefore, things have meaning only in relation to other things in a system of relations and structures, and therefore, this famous statement within structuralism, structuralist understanding or theorizing of culture, that is, culture is like a language. This is indeed a loaded sentence. We can spend a whole lecture or two only on this, that culture is like a language. For us at this elementary level, it simply suffices for us to understand the the analogy that is drawn from Saussurean linguistics, okay, to particularly the sign and its arbitrariness, relationality, differential meaning, okay, units and structures. In that sense, culture is also a language. Okay. Cultural units, forms are also signs that whose meaning comes out in a relation between the signifier and signified, and very importantly, okay, even politically importantly, is the fact that the relation between the sign, the signifier and the signified is an arbitrary one, something that we accept only through convention. Therefore, myths, as I have pointed out by people like Roland Barthes, for instance, myths are also second order signs and can also be understood as a system of signifying practices, as having meaning, where meaning emanates through a system of rules, through a system of binary opposites, for instance, and this we can talk about later, or if we have time. The political part of it is how is the position here that is important. Remember, theory also has to take a position, is that structuralism shows us, because of the arbitrariness of the sign, it shows us that, and we know that, remember that signs are accepted by convention, right. The deeper question here is how does the relationship between a signifier and a signified, or how do binary oppositions, where the the one or the first term is always a more privileged term, like man and woman, husband and wife, okay, parent and child, then light and dark. How is it that they are kind of worked out, signified in these ways? The point then is that it is ideology, okay. It is ideology or a way of thinking, a way of comprehending the world that naturalizes interpretations and meanings. Meanings do not happen on their own. They are matters of power, ideology, okay, of politics that naturalizes interpretations or meanings, and gives us these conceptual maps or myths. So, we shall end with a point given by one of the famous structuralist critics named Jonathan Culler. Okay. Culler says that the combination at the particular moment of a given signifier and signified is a contingent result of the historical process. So, if you understand the historicity and the spatial and temporal situatedness of a meaning connection between the signifier and the signified, then you understand that these are constructs. Okay, these are constructs in time, constructs in space, which have only because of repeated use through its legitimation by power structures have become naturalized, and to use a word, proper word here, conventionalized. Okay, but they are not givens. So, like the linguistic sign, Jonathan Culler says, culture can also be understood as conventional and relational. So, let us go on to the discussion. So, name 3 theoretical approaches in cultural studies. There are many, but only if you just have to name 3, these are Marxism, structuralism and post-structuralism. Define semiotics. Semiotics may be defined as the science of signs. How, according to structuralists, do we construct meaning? Then we have to say that meaning, according to structuralism or structuralists, is constructed through the creation and interpretation of signs. How do structuralists theorize culture? This is the most important question for us. Structuralists say that like language, culture is a similar system. In fact, culture can be read in terms of a language, and the theory of structuralist linguistics as given to us by Saussure and others, and that things or cultural objects, forms, phenomena have meaning only in relation to other things in a system of relations and structures, particularly by differentiation and by binary opposites, and which are, again, remember the first points that we made, which are structures of seeing, which are ways of seeing, deep structures of seeing, by which humankind has been trying to make sense of otherwise chaotic data. These are structures that are imposed. So, in a way it raises the greater philosophical question, then what is reality? And we say that reality is nothing but the sum total of the structures of the mind that we bring to bear upon the chaotic data that are incoming. Okay? So, this again raises a huge problematic question of whether the reality that we perceive is indeed the whole thing, or is it something that is only constructed by us. These are matters really of philosophy, and we are not going to go into that. Also, in structuralist understanding of culture, we can say that if a word is a sign, then similarly any cultural artifact is a sign, and which has its meaning in a system of units and rules. It has its status in a system of units and rules, and we understand cultural phenomena as signifying practices. Finally, ideology, the political position here, then here of course you can always counter those who say that structuralism is an apolitical stance, it is an out and out and scientific way. No, by doing this we understand a very important point. Because of the arbitrariness of the sign, we can therefore conclude, okay, that no sign is natural. Now, we are not only talking only about the linguistic level, most importantly in the cultural level. Cultural phenomena signify certain things, okay, and these significations are not a naturalized one, are not naturally given ones, they are naturalized through ideology, okay, through a way of looking at the world, about which we will be talking about, talking in another module, right. So, well, I hope this was not difficult for you, nor scary for you. Theory is beautiful. Theory is a way, an enriching way of understanding, be it language, be it culture. And in the next lecture, we are going to look at another theory, that is Marxism. Thank you.